Joseph stood on the sprawling stone driveway, the heavy iron gates of the estate he had designed and financed clanging shut behind him. The sound was a metallic finality, a jarring, industrial echo of the absolute betrayal he had just endured. It was a custom-forged wrought iron gate, a complex pattern of security and status he had commissioned himself to keep the world out. Now, it was the world keeping him out. Behind those bars was the decade of sweat and architectural brilliance he had poured into the Zeitz dynasty. Ahead of him was only the baking, indifferent sun of the asphalt, and a long, lonely road that led to a life Roberta thought would break him. He could feel her eyes drilling into his back. Roberta, the woman who had just effectively erased him from his own biography. She stood in the portico, a sharp, unyielding figure in a blood-red dress that stood out against the beige limestone like a fresh wound. He didn't have to turn around to know the look on her face, that mask of aristocratic, cold-blooded victory. This was her crowning achievement, the moment the loyal employee she called a husband was liquidated like a bad stock. She believed she had stripped him to the bone. She now held the keys to the grand modern villa, the titles to the fleet of luxury SUVs, and the legal shackles on their 3 daughters, Linda, Munoz, and Carol, who stood beside her like silent, colorful trophies. Roberta saw a man with 1 suitcase and 0 prospects. She had checked the bank accounts, the property deeds, and the corporate rosters. But in her arrogant rush to bury him, she had forgotten to check the vault she never had the combination to, the one inside Joseph's mind. Joseph Flores, a stoic investment architect, is systematically destroyed by his wife, Roberta Zeitz, and her family empire. Framed for corporate failure and evicted from his home, Joseph is left with only a suitcase while Roberta seizes their estate, luxury cars, and custody of their 3 daughters, Linda, Munoz, and Carol. Believing him destitute, Roberta misses Joseph's vault, a secret, massive investment portfolio he grew over a decade that now exceeds her family's wealth. Joseph begins a cold, financial siege to bankrupt the Zeitz empire and reclaim his children. The heavy, rhythmic clang of wrought iron gates, symbolizing Joseph's mechanical exclusion from his own life and family. The intro, a visual study in power. Joseph stands on the pavement in a 3-piece armor suit with 1 suitcase, while Roberta stands at the villa in a triumph, red dress, surrounded by their confused children. The scene establishes a clinical coldness that masks Joseph's hidden financial power. The heavy iron gate of the Zeitz estate swung shut with a sudden, mechanical clang, a sound of industrial finality that vibrated through the soles of Joseph's shoes. He stood on the asphalt with a single black suitcase, the clanging of the gate marking the moment he was officially locked out of the world he had built. Behind the bars, Roberta stood in a striking red dress, the color of triumph and blood, watching him with a mask of cold-blooded victory as their 3 daughters, Linda, Munoz, and Carol, looked on in silent confusion. The sound echoed back to the previous Tuesday, to the cold, boardroom betrayal. In a room smelling of expensive leather and calculated malice, Roberta and her father had executed their masterpiece. They had framed Joseph for a massive corporate disaster, a Westgate-style loss he had actually warned against, using it as the lever to trigger a morality clause in their prenup. As they stripped him of his title and dignity, Joseph had remained silent, a numbers clerk being liquidated like a bad asset. They saw a defeated man. They didn't see the vault of his mind already shifting into a devastating offense. The transition from the Zeitz estate to the 4th floor walk-up was not just a change in zip code. It was a descent into a gray universe. The apartment was a 400-square-foot box of sterile off-white walls that smelled perpetually of old paint and the neighbors cooking, a universe away from the sun-drenched rooms Joseph had designed. Here, the clinical coldness of his life was no longer a corporate strategy. It was the temperature of the floorboards under his feet. The first few days, the silence was a heavy, suffocating blanket. At the villa, there had been the constant, vibrant hum of life, the girls, laughter echoing down the hall, and the rhythmic pulse of the pool filter. Now the only soundtrack was the distant wail of sirens and the groan of an ancient elevator, the sounds of a man who had been unpersoned by a predatory dynasty. Joseph unpacked his single suitcase, his only remaining armor, into a cheap particle board dresser in less than 5 minutes. Every movement felt like an exercise in agonizing solitude. He traded the leather-wrapped steering wheel of a Range Rover for the cold, germ-slicked poles of the city bus. Roberta had calculated this transition perfectly, intending for the wrong side of town, to break his spirit and validate her narrative of his incompetence. To the world looking in, Joseph Flores was a pauper being erased from his own biography. Yet, amidst the peeling wallpaper and the single window facing a brick wall, Joseph remained a leviathan, swimming in the deep. He sat on the edge of a lumpy mattress, not with the slumped shoulders of a defeated man, but with the stoic patience that Roberta had fatally mistaken for weakness. He was an investment architect who knew that the foundation was most critical when the structure appeared most ruined. In this gray cell, his focus remained singular. His vault was untouched, and the silence was not a sign of his end, but the quiet before a devastating offense. Joseph sat on the lumpy mattress of his sterile apartment, the silence of the gray universe pressing against the walls. He reached into his suitcase and pulled out the worn leather journal, the physical manifestation of his vault. This was the secret life Roberta had never bothered to investigate, a decade-long masterpiece of stoic patience and financial genius. While he had played the supporting character in the Zeitz dynasty, he had been quietly planting seeds from a modest inheritance. He opened the encrypted ledger, the neat columns of figures glowing with the heat of a devastating offense. The growth was exponential, calculated shorts on fraudulent CEOs, early stakes in biotech, and undervalued assets that the Thorns and the Zeitz would have dismissed. The final figure on the last page was staggering, $50 million. Roberta believed she had rendered him a pauper, but he was a leviathan hiding in a 400-square-foot box. This fortune was no longer for a shared future. It was a weapon to dismantle the empire that tried to unperson him. The digital chime of the video call was as cold and clinical as the apartment's peeling walls. Joseph's hands remained steady as the screen flickered to life, revealing a world of sun-drenched rooms he no longer inhabited. Roberta appeared first, her face a mask of cold, serene triumph as she checked her watch with theatrical impatience. "You have 15 minutes," she stated, her voice smooth as polished ice, before turning the camera toward Linda, Munoz, and Carol. The girls sat in a rigid row, their eyes searching his sterile off-white background with growing confusion. Roberta lingered in the frame, her presence a sentinel of social superiority as she subtly mocked his new lifestyle to the children. "Daddy is just very busy with his complicated work," she purred, her tone dripping with the poison of public pity. Every word was a carefully chosen dart designed to redefine him as a failure in his daughter's eyes. Joseph forced a smile, masking the cold, clarifying rage burning within him. He wasn't just a ghost on a screen. He was a leviathan preparing to shatter her narrative forever. Joseph stepped into the office of Alistair Finch, a space that was the antithesis of the glass and chrome Zeitz headquarters. Where Roberta's world felt clinical and fragile, this room smelled of leather and old-world leverage. Finch, a man with eyes that held a lifetime of observing human folly, peered over the stack of documents Joseph provided. Joseph didn't present a plea for sympathy. He slid his leather journal, the vault, across the polished mahogany. The attorney's professional detachment evaporated as he scanned the meticulously detailed record of Joseph's secret trades. Finch looked up, a spark of genuine admiration replacing his skepticism. "You're not a ghost, Joseph. You're a leviathan," he breathed, recognizing the sheer scale of the $50 million achievement. They began a vulture strategy, planning to quietly buy up the distressed bonds of the Zeitz company. The goal was no longer just survival. It was a calculated financial and legal siege to reclaim Linda, Munoz, and Carol while letting Roberta's arrogance be her own poison. Joseph arrived at the school gymnasium for the annual fundraiser, his presence an immediate curiosity among the Northwood elite. Roberta stood at the center of a social circle, her red dress a sentinel of social superiority against the backdrop of primary-colored streamers. When she spotted him, her saccharine smile tightened into a mask of public pity. She drifted over with her mother, Catherine, their path designed to intercept him and deliver a calculated humiliation in front of the other parents. It takes a lot of courage to show your face after such a public fall, Roberta projected, her voice carrying just enough to ensure the poison of public pity reached the surrounding crowd. Catherine glanced at his modest attire, her silence a form of loud, ringing approval for her daughter's cruelty. Roberta even signaled security, attempting to have him removed as a non-entity who could no longer afford the entrance fee. Joseph endured the hot wave of humiliation with stoic patience, never revealing that he had already made a secret donation 10 times larger than the Zeitz family's contribution. He wasn't there to beg. He was a leviathan gathering intelligence for the Zeitz collapse. Joseph watched the monitors in his dim apartment, the gray universe, now serving as the command center for a calculated financial and legal siege. With a final, deliberate keystroke, he executed the vulture strategy he and Alistair Finch had meticulously prepared. By dumping his massive, secret stakes in their competitors and calling in the distressed bonds he had quietly acquired, Joseph triggered a catastrophic margin call on the Zeitz family's core assets. The Zeitz corporate dynasty, built on aggressive acquisitions and unshakable self-regard, began to buckle under the weight of its own hidden debt. In their glass and chrome headquarters, Roberta's father panicked as their liquid cash vanished into the trap Joseph had set. They had mistaken his stoic patience for weakness, never realizing he was a leviathan capable of bleeding the empire from the shadows. As the Zeitz stocks plummeted, Joseph felt no joy, only the cold, clarifying rage of a father reclaiming his life. The Zeitz collapse was no longer a possibility, it was a mathematical certainty. The Zeitz annual gala was a monument to modern chrome and glass arrogance, where Roberta stood center stage, preparing to announce a merger she thought would cement her family's unshakable self-regard. She was still wrapped in the mask of cold, serene triumph, unaware that the liquid cash of her empire had already vanished into Joseph's trap. The room fell into a screaming siren of silence as the doors swung open. Joseph entered, not as the ghost she had evicted, but as a leviathan rising from the deep. He didn't plead. He walked to the podium with the stoic patience of a man who had finally turned the first page of his own book. As the legal documents were presented, the saccharine smile slid from Roberta's face. Joseph was no longer a numbers clerk. He was the majority shareholder of the acquiring firm. He looked at Roberta, now the unwanted supporting character, and handed her an eviction notice for the very house she stole. The hostile takeover was complete. He was the new chairman, and the Zeitz corporate dynasty was officially his. The heavy iron gates of the Zeitz estate stood open, but this time, Joseph was the one behind the wheel of the sleek black sedan. He pulled into the curving driveway, not as a liquidated asset, but as the new master of Northwood. On the porch, Roberta stood in the shadows of the grand modern villa, her red dress of triumph replaced by the frantic, shivering core of a woman who had finally been cast aside. Linda, Munoz, and Carol ran toward the car, their faces lit with the remnant of a galaxy they had feared lost. Joseph stepped out, the clinical coldness of his exile finally melting into a core of resolve as hard and clear as a diamond. He was no longer a ghost to be exorcised, but the man who had shattered the narrative to reclaim his heart. As he gathered his daughters, he looked back at the gate that once clanged shut. It remained open, a symbol that his home would never again be a museum of unspoken grievances, but a sanctuary built on a vault that Roberta could never touch. It's been a thrill drafting this Leviathan saga with you.